voice of women in sport.
Hello, and thank you for downloading the Athlete Profile Show here on Wisp Sports with me, Chris Stafford. And you can join in the conversation, of course, anytime by following us on social media at Wisp Sports. We would love to hear what you have to say about women's sports. My guest today is Canadian and Czechoslovakian rower Helena Hlas, who was born to Czech parents and grew up in Winnipeg, Canada. She later spent several years in Calgary pursuing alpine ski racing dreams before discovering rowing during her studies at the University of Calgary. She completed her Masters of Kinesiology at the University of Western Ontario in London on the theme of doping in sport before relocating to Prague to race with the Czech National Team. After an unsuccessful trialling season in the spring of 2019, Helena decided to relocate yet again, this time to Lucerne, where she now spends her days on the crystal clear Swiss waters rowing and coaching. She is also in the process of starting her own company to help athletes earn additional income doing what they do best. Helena is passionate about ethics and reducing barriers to performance in sport. She wrote an article entitled Racing Backwards, Addressing Sexism in Contemporary Sport, which addresses open sexism at a well-known Swiss rowing club. And she wrote to us to share this story with us. Helena, hi, welcome to the program.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for reaching out to us here at Wisp Sports and telling us a little bit more about rowing but there was one, of course, reference that you sent me entitled Racing Backwards, Addressing Sexism in Contemporary Sport. But you come, of course, from rowing. So tell us a little bit about your background and how this came about.
So I actually started my journey in sport in alpine ski racing as a young girl growing up and following the footsteps of my older brother. And when I graduated high school, I decided to retire from sport and, live a regular life, go to university, have a social life, have time to do things. And I quickly found out that it was a little bit more boring than I was hoping for. So I reached out in the university and was looking for alternate options. And I soon joined the University of Calgary in Canada rowing team. And I actually tested with a program there called Row to the Podium, which is basically set out to find athletes that are coming from previous sports and transitioning into rowing with the hopes of kind of developing them faster en route to the Olympics and try to win some medals for Canada. And this was kind of an exciting opportunity for me because, skiing hadn't worked out and a lot of ups and downs with that, with injury. And so I kind of started rowing with high ambitions and was hoping to really kind of aim for gold early on. And that was my primary motivation, I think, at the start, which is interesting in itself. And I think is a whole other dialogue to have, these kind of concepts for bringing athletes in and trying to just have them win medals for the country, I think is a whole nother thing. But so I started rowing and I quickly fell in love with it. And I think in 2016 was my first international race for Canada at the University Games. And I got to live in London where the women's national team was based at the time and train and live with girls who were getting ready for the Olympics, which was really cool. And then from there, I actually the following year moved to the Czech Republic because I have dual citizenship. My parents immigrated to Canada from the Czech Republic about 35 years ago now. And I hadn't qualified for the Canadian team that year. And I said, well, why don't I try taking advantage of this dual citizenship? And so I moved out there and I ended up staying there for about 2.5 years. And last year I competed for the Czech National Team at World Cups, at World Championships. it wasn't a very successful year, but it was definitely a good experience. And I returned this year again with hopes of competing and hopefully qualifying for the 2020 Olympics. But unfortunately, the trials didn't go as planned. There were definitely some political issues involved, I would say. But at the end of the day, it didn't work out. And I came to live in Switzerland. I mean, I'm a bit all over the place, but I came to live in Switzerland with my partner. And I started rowing with a club here, thinking I might return to the Czech Republic and try racing again there. And then I kind of, over the summer, just racing in the club environment, realized that the environment of, like cooperative sport and honest sport was one that I really missed. Competing at the national level or international level. And I decided that I was much happier here and decided to stay. And I just started coaching at a local club here. I'm working with the junior team. And I really feel like I can hopefully make a bigger impact in the sport at this level. So it's quite cool. But the reason you and I got in touch, as you mentioned, is this article about sexism in modern sport. And this all began when I was sent by many people a link to an article in a Swiss newspaper here about a club that doesn't allow women into their club at all. And the funny thing is that the original article from this Swiss newspaper is written from an interview with a woman who they had as a coxswain, as the woman who is steering the boat. And so they brought this woman in to steer their 8-man crew, but in the end, they wouldn't let her join the team. So it there's a conflict, I think, in many ways, and it prompted me to want to write an article that was in English that I could share to all my North American friends who I thought would sympathize with me a lot more. Because although the article here got a lot of traction, it's not stimulating really any, I think, honest conversation about it. It's not stimulating any change. For example, the Swiss Rowing Federation has made the statement that the autonomy of the club is of primary importance, so that they can choose whoever they want in their club as a number one rule. And they also stated that they didn't believe it was discrimination. So to me, that's, I think, a big problem. And I wanted to bring it to you guys because I've been following you on social media, and I thought it would be a good platform for discussion.
Well, I'm glad that you did. And I'm curious if this really speaks to the sort of a wider problem in Switzerland, in rowing in Switzerland, or in rowing generally. And I'm also curious to hear about rowing in the Czech Republic too, because obviously that's very competitive. Give us a sense of, putting this in perspective, contextualizing it, and where rowing fits in the bigger spectrum.
Yeah, so funny enough, when I was in the Czech Republic, rowing in Prague, I was registered with a club in which I was the only woman. I think for the past few decades, they hadn't had a woman there in their rowing club. That said, it's a larger club with many other sports, like a football team, cycling, alpine skiing, and they have women in those departments. But in rowing, I was the only one who was in that club. And I think both in the Czech Republic and here and in European countries, you just have a really deep-rooted history. And you have certain people who are maybe a little higher up in the departments, in the clubs, and they're making these large-scale decisions based on history, tradition, and as we know, the history of sport, going back 50 years, was generally sexist. So I think when you have this kind of environment that tends to seek upholding tradition, you have these kinds of problems.
And how are women generally treated in the European countries where you have rowed, Helena, in terms of the competitive athlete, say the professional athlete, those or those certainly on teams, do they get equal opportunities?
I mean, it's hard to say because from my perspective, I believe I had an equal opportunity, especially in the smaller nations. I think you have, with limited access, it can be a little bit tricky, but when there's limited access, you also have more direction of access, if that makes sense. So say you only have 5 athletes, and 2 of them are women with potential to bring a medal back for the country, I think they will still get the adequate resources that they need. I think that's at the elite level, but also when we're speaking kind of internationally and talking about racing, traditionally and to this day, I think men's events get a lot more attention. So in rowing, the last event of all the major competitions is the men's 8. And this is always the event that is closing up, the World Championships and the Olympics. And I think this speaks largely to kind of our discourse about what we value in the sport. So one answer can be that, okay, the men's 8 is the fastest time of any event, and it's maybe the most exciting for viewers, but it may not necessarily mean that it's the most valuable event. But traditionally, that's how we've perceived it. So I think there's a little bit more need for changing how we perceive value in these types of things.
And amongst the rowing clubs, then, of course, the one that you mentioned was the Grasshoppers Rowing Club in Zurich. But is this typical then, or have you come across this in other rowing clubs in Switzerland?
This is the only one that I've experienced in Switzerland, and obviously it drew a lot of attention recently with this article that was in the newspaper here. I heard some people mention that, well, there's one for women also next to it, which makes it, in their opinion, okay for there to be a men's only club. But of course, the women's only club was started out of necessity because of the fact that they weren't let into this club. So I think, as far as I know, it's the only one of its kind. But Swiss people in general are known for really their traditional ways. There's like a province here in Switzerland that only, I think, maybe 30 years ago granted women voting rights. So it's not a totally new phenomenon in the country itself.
Hi, I'm Sam Cornett, a proud WISP ambassador and a Canadian squash player. I'm grateful to find all my sports news in one place, and I love the in-depth coverage and variety WISP offers. To follow me, check me out on Instagram, samantha.j91. Thanks for listening and supporting WISP.
How popular is rowing in Switzerland?
So I do believe that in Europe, rowing is a bit more accessible and it makes it a lot more popular, I think, amongst younger athletes. In Canada, a lot of people start like I did in university, whereas I think just based on infrastructure and accessibility, you see it more in the younger populations in Europe. So, for example, in Prague, the river runs right through the city, and on a 4-kilometer stretch, you have maybe 8 rowing clubs in a really small vicinity. And same thing in Switzerland, there's a lot of rowing clubs on one body of water, a lot of things to choose from, and just easier access. So I think that's why you see younger kids participating in the sport that maybe isn't so popular in Canada.
Okay. And now you've got a coaching job. So do you think you can make a difference in terms of, women's access and equality, not just within Switzerland, but, having a voice in the coaching community? How much do you think that could be an influential voice within your world?
I definitely hope that I can make some kind of influence. I mean, my club doesn't have a large population of female athletes to begin with. There's about one girl at the moment who's very competitive. So that's hard to see when there's such an imbalance, but I definitely hope that I can make an impact there. I think for women's sport in general, the more we see women in coaching positions or in association positions like in the Swiss Rowing Association or in the Olympic Committee, the more we are, used to seeing women in these positions, the more likely we can have engagement from young girls as well. Like, I think it just has to become more of a norm, more of the language, to see not only girls wanting to participate, but also staying in the sport. I think here, especially in Switzerland, they have quite an interesting education program where very young in their high school education, the students start working as interns a few days a week. And so even this one athlete that I have, she's already working more or less full time as an intern, and she's like 15 years old. So she doesn't have so much time to participate in sport. And it's maybe her engagement in sport doesn't seem so valuable as it might if she was in another country, like in Canada, for example.
Coaching then, has it become a full-time job for you, or are you looking for other competitive activities as well?
It is at the moment full income from time. I'm actually working on starting a little business here in Switzerland and hopefully going international with it. I want to build a marketplace for athletes to earn money doing their sport. So someone like you could hire me at my own hourly wage that I have chosen, and I could go take you rowing, I could take you erging. I just have seen in my experiences and many of my fellow athletes that they're not getting adequately compensated. A lot of them are struggling to buy groceries, and they're constantly running crowdfunding campaigns. And I said, there must be a solution. There must be a way for me as an athlete to work as a freelancer. And I did some research and I saw that there wasn't any solution. And I thought, why don't I try to create that solution? So I'm in the midst of that, and it's taking up a lot of my time, as well as learning German and coaching here. But yeah.
Do you think you would like to have another shot at getting on the Czech team or even the Canadian team for rowing?
Yeah, so when I first came to Switzerland for the summer, the intention was to train and go back. The problem with the Czech Republic is that it's a very small team, and they're very used to doing things in a certain way. I don't believe the selection process is a fair one. You can sit in a boat with a girl who maybe would prefer to row with the person she's been rowing with for her last 5 years, or in my case, prefer rowing with her sister maybe, and they won't give you a fair chance. So for me at this point, to really put everything on the line and fight for a position where I'm maybe not necessarily the preferred choice is a big struggle. I think I'm not totally sure where I'll end up with the sport. I still love it, and I love going out on the water now, probably more than I ever did. But whether or not it necessarily has to be on a national team or trying to go to the Olympics, I'm not 100% sure, just because I was so kind of negatively impacted by my experience at the international level. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But I think the biggest lesson I've learned now is my perspective of the definition of an athlete has changed so much. I've met people who are just regular club athletes, and they're working full-time jobs, maybe coming off the night shift and going rowing and hammering out the workout with the same athletes who are elite athletes doing nothing else but rowing. And it's really changed kind of my respect for what it means to be an athlete. And I think, I listened to your podcast about the retiring athlete, And I think really redefining what athleticism is and what it even means to be a high performing athlete is very important. And I think we don't need to say, I'm on the national team or I compete at this world championships to be a valuable athlete in my community. So I think that's kind of where I'm at now. So I don't necessarily see the urgent need to get back out there because of my experience. That said, I'm still a very competitive person and I'm always looking out for a new fight. But at the moment we're sticking with having fun and approaching other challenges.
Well, you're in a good place for some alpine skiing too.
Yes, I am. And lots of cycling. I've been chasing, I don't know if you've heard of Strava, but it's like a web or a phone application that you can record your bike ride and race with people. So I've been chasing a bunch of Queen of the Mountains here, trying to get the fastest time going up the mountain. So there's outlets. If you look, there's outlets to be competitive and there's outlets to be an athlete everywhere. And I think for so long I had perceived it as only being valuable so long as I was on a national team or so long as I could say, yeah, I'm en route to the Olympics or, I'm a road to podium athlete, like somebody selected me, I am valuable. And I think I've kind of evolved, luckily, away from that. And it's made me love the sport more and I think has made it for a better perspective as a whole. So hopefully when it comes to coaching, I'm able to also promote that and, see what kind of impact I can make on women and young athletes in general.
Yeah, there certainly is value for athletic performances that are non-Olympic and of course for coaching too. So will you be writing more on contemporary sport and the issues around it? Will we be able to find other articles?
Yeah, I think I've, kind of sparked now with a bit more extra free time and not so many blisters on my hands. I've got a bit more free time for writing. And I mean, it's fun just to get in a dialogue about these kinds of issues, especially when it comes up in the media or as you guys are constantly sharing. I think it's very valuable to talk about it. And, maybe I don't necessarily have the perfect perspective on it or there's no right or wrong answer, but just opening up the conversation without necessarily even pointing fingers in one way or another, I think is really cool. And I think that's why I appreciate what you guys are doing so much.
Well, thank you. Constructive dialogue, I think, is important, as you say, to get those issues out there front and center. So, Helena, thank you again for reaching out to us. We really appreciate it and for sharing this with us. And, I think we should stay in touch because I think there'll be more conversations about what you're doing and the topics that you'll be addressing as you make your way.
Thank you. I hope so. And as I said, I really appreciate what you guys are doing. And I think it's important conversations to have. So kudos to you guys.
Happy holidays from Wisp Sports.
And you can read Helena's article by going to the show notes accompanying this episode on our website at wispsports.com. Just go to the Listen tab at the top of the page there and then drop down to Athlete Profile. And if you have a story that you would like to share with us about women's sports, then do drop us a line to info@wispsports.com. And you can always join in the conversation by following us on social media at Wisp Sports. If you enjoy what we do here at Wisp Sports and would like to leave us a review on iTunes, that would be much appreciated. Until the next time, thanks for listening and helping us to turn up the volume on women's sports.